August 7th, 1945, Hiroshima, Japan. The car crawls to a stop where the road simply ceases to exist. Ahead, as far as the eye can travel through the gray haze, the city is gone. No streets, no houses, no temples. Just a flat, colorless plain of ash and twisted metal, like someone has pressed a giant palm down onto Hiroshima and smeared it across the delta. Dr. Yoshio Nishina steps out first. His uniform is civilian, a dark summer suit dust already settling on the shoulders. But everyone here knows he wears another invisible rank, Japan's foremost nuclear physicist, the man who has spent the last years of the war chasing the secret of the atom for the Imperial Army. The heat still lingers, a thick presence on the air that does not feel natural. His shoes crunch on glass that has melted and re-solidified in puddles slick and black. Nearby, a steel beam has been twisted into the shape of a corkscrew. "Sensei," murmurs Sagan, one of his younger colleagues from Riken, voice muffled behind a cloth mask. This can't be conventional. You are there with them now at the edge of that man-made desert, watching men who have studied energy as numbers on a chalkboard struggle to understand what it means when those numbers step off the page and walk into the world. Nishina says nothing at first. He just walks. They move inward toward what used to be the center of Hiroshima. The army officer assigned to escort them, a major sword at his side, sweat staining the armpits of his khaki tunic, keeps glancing at Nishina, as if waiting for him to say the words everyone fears. The smell is worst where the shadows are. On a concrete wall, they find one of them the silhouette of a man who had been sitting when the light struck. The bench is gone. The man is gone. Only the faint outline remains white against the darkened stone, as if someone had cut his shape out of the world in a single instant. Sagan inhales sharply. "Thermal radiation," he whispers. "Extremely intense, and from a single direction." Nishina kneels, fingers hovering just above the stone, careful not to touch. He has seen theoretical blast diagrams from German reports, equations scribbled in Copenhagen years ago, calculations done in Tokyo just last winter. But none of that prepared him for this ghostly outline on a wall in Hiroshima. "Measure the distance to the hypocenter," he says quietly. His voice is calm, but the muscles in his jaw are tight. A younger physicist, notebook in hand, snaps to it. They have a rough map of the pre-raid city from before the war, folded and refolded so many times the creases are white. Using landmarks that no longer exist, a school here, a tram stop there, they triangulate where the American bomb must have detonated. It wasn't on the ground. There is no crater, no radial gouge where an enormous high-explosive charge would have punched into the earth. Instead, the damage spreads evenly in all directions, a perfect circle of devastation. Buildings near the center are not merely toppled, they are erased. "An airburst," Nishina says. "High altitude, very high." The major clears his throat. "Dr. Nishina, the Army General Staff wishes to know what kind of weapon could do this." For a moment, all you hear is the soft hiss of ash, shifting under their boots, the distant crack of something brittle collapsing as the ruins cool and settle. Nishina straightens, lifts his gaze to the empty sky above the city. He imagines a single aircraft, the reports said one, B-29, just one, gliding in almost unopposed. No massive formation, no waves of bombers. Just one plane and a single blinding flash that turned a living city into a furnace. In his mind, he runs through the possibilities like a checklist. High explosive, impossible. There is no crater. Incendiaries, the pattern isn't right and the blast is far too great. A new chemical agent. Chemicals do not twist steel like straw and melt roof tiles into glass. The answer waits for him where it has always been, in the nucleus of uranium, in graphs and constants and cross-sections he has known for years. At Riken, they had told the army that such a weapon was theoretically possible, but unlikely to be ready before the war's end. Not by Japan, not even by the United States, whose industrial power they still underestimated. Now he is walking inside the proof that his caution, his belief that the world still had time, was wrong. He turns back to his team. "Look carefully," he orders. "We must know its yield." They begin their grim survey. At a certain distance from the center, wooden telephone poles are blown down like stalks of grass. Farther out, houses still stand, but with their roofs peeled away, timbers snapped. They estimate overpressure, compare it to data from conventional raids. Every observation feeds into an invisible equation forming in Nishina's mind. 2, perhaps 300 meters altitude, he murmurs. The damage radius, 6-7 kilometers. Sagane looks up, eyes red behind his glasses. Then Sensei, it is as we feared. Nishina does not answer immediately. He stoops to pick up a small roof tile that has bubbled and fused on one side like wax held too close to a candle. The temperature needed to do that flashes through his mind along with the only mechanism he knows that can release so much energy so fast. A chain reaction. This is not a conventional bomb, he finally says. This is a Genzai Bakudan, an atomic bomb. The word hangs in the hot, stagnant air. The officer's face goes pale under the dust. One of the younger physicists sinks down onto a broken curb, suddenly unsteady. You can almost feel it with them, that uncanny moment when a concept they themselves pursued in secret laboratories has been turned against their own country by someone else. For years they had reassured one another that Japan was not so far behind, that the Americans would find the same obstacles, scarce uranium complex separation methods, the crushing demands of total war. They believed the race for the atom would outlast the war itself. Yet here in the ruins of Hiroshima, the finish line lies at their feet. And it is American. We must report to Tokyo at once, the major says hoarsely. The cabinet must know. Nishina nods, but his eyes remain on the horizon where the burned city meets the summer sky. Somewhere beyond that sky, he knows the United States has done what Japan only dreamed of doing. They have mastered the atom assembled. The factories refined the uranium and delivered a working weapon from the belly of a single bomber. He has spent a career turning chaos into equations. Now for the first time, he feels the numbers looking back at him. Take all the measurements you can, he tells his men. Every broken window, every scorched surface. History will ask how this was done. We must be able to answer. As they fan out through the wasteland, you follow them with your eyes, tiny figures moving through the aftermath of a new age. Behind their calm, methodical work, another realization is forming, not just about what weapon did this, but what it means. In that silent, smoldering city, Japan's top physicists are beginning to understand a truth far more devastating than the bomb itself. The train to Tokyo rattles through the night, its windows blacked out by order of the army. Inside a cramped carriage reserved for special personnel, Yoshio Nishina sits hunched over a low table, papers spread in front of him. The electric light above flickers with every sway of the car, casting his face into alternating bands of shadow and pallid yellow. Across from him, Sagan fights sleep. Soot still smudges the younger physicist's cuffs. Hiroshima's dust has followed them into the car, clinging to cloth and skin as if the city refuses to let them go. You can picture the rhythm of the wheels, the faint smell of coal and hot metal, the silence between men who have spent the day counting the ways a city died. Nishina taps the end of his pencil against a page of figures. Blast radius. Overpressure. Approximate altitude of detonation. Thermal damage at known distances. He is reconstructing Hiroshima in reverse, turning ruins back into numbers, and then turning those numbers into something even more unsettling. Look here, he says at last, sliding the paper towards Sagane. At 2 kilometers from the hypocenter, wooden buildings, destroyed roof tiles, shattered people killed instantly. At 3 kilometers, glass shattered, severe injuries, fires from thermal radiation. Sagane squints at the columns. Yes, it matches what we saw. Not just what we saw, Nishina replies. What we calculated. He reaches into his briefcase and pulls out an older sheet, its edges worn and smudged. The handwriting is his own, but from another time, late 1943 perhaps, or early 1944, when the war still seemed winnable, when visits from army officers to Riken meant funds, not desperation. On that page are the familiar symbols of nuclear physics: is for cross-sections, N for neutron flux, E for energy yields. 2 words stand out in the margin, underlined twice, in English: atomic bomb. He places the old calculations beside today's measurements. The alignment is chilling. Assuming an air burst at roughly 600 meters, Nishina says, and using the radius of total destruction as a guide, the yield must be on the order of perhaps 15-20 kilotons of TNT. Sagan's eyes widen. He does the conversion in his head back to uranium mass, to fissions per second, to the avalanche of neutrons that must have torn through a critical assembly in that instant above Hiroshima. That would mean, he begins. Nishina finishes for him, that they achieved a fast neutron fission weapon. A gun-type assembly is most likely. Very efficient, very elegant. The last word tastes bitter. He leans back, pinching the bridge of his nose. Somewhere in the next carriage, an officer snores lightly. Another clinks a sack bottle against a cup, trying to drink away the images of charred bodies and blasted streets. You remember what we told the army in 1943, Nishina says quietly. That such a device was possible in principle, but impractical in wartime. Sagani nods. He remembers the meeting clearly, the senior officers in their dark uniforms, the map of the Pacific on the wall pins marking Midway, Guadalcanal, the Solomons. The war had already tilted then, but no one in that room had admitted it. You said Sagan recalls that even with our best efforts, separating enough uranium-235 would require immense resources. Power, factories, time. Yes, Nishina says. And we did not have those things. He had been blunt as a civilian scientist could be, before men who carried swords. Japan's uranium deposits were meager. Its industrial base, already strained by shipbuilding and aircraft production, could not sustain the kind of massive gaseous diffusion or electromagnetic separation plants he knew were required. The officers had listened, faces unreadable. One of them asked if the Americans might succeed. They faced the same obstacles, Nishina had replied then. It is a race that will outlast this war. Now on the train from Hiroshima, he stares at the intersecting lines of damage radii and realizes how badly he misjudged the distance between Japan and the United States. Not in years, but in capability. Sagani breaks the silence. Sensei, how many such bombs do you think they can make? It is the question everyone will ask. The army, the navy, the cabinet, the emperor perhaps. Nishina gazes at the lamp above them, at the weak yellow light struggling against the blackout curtains. He imagines instead the white sunburst over Hiroshima, the flash that burned shadows into stone. I do not know, he says honestly, but if they can make one, they can make more. He hesitates, then adds, and if they chose Hiroshima first, there will be a second. The train plunges into a tunnel. The vibration deepens, and for a moment all is darkness. When they emerge, the faint dawn is beginning to gray the sky outside. Somewhere to the south, the ruins of Hiroshima still smolder. By the time Nishina arrives in Tokyo, the city is already humming with rumors. The Americans claim via radio broadcasts to have used a new bomb of extraordinary power. The Foreign Ministry has no explanation. The Army General Staff has several, all wrong. Some whisper of a new kind of incendiary, others of a vast chemical weapon. In a high-ceilinged conference room of the Army Ministry, the air is thick with tobacco smoke and sweat despite the early hour. Senior officers sit behind a long table, caps beside them. Swords leaned carefully against the polished wood. A single fan turns lazily overhead, stirring the heat without relieving it. You can feel the tension when Nishina is ushered in, his briefcase under his arm, his clothes still faintly dusted with Hiroshima's ash. Dr. Nishina, the presiding general, begins nodding. We appreciate your prompt return. You have seen the damage yourself. Nishina bows. Yes, General. I spent the day examining the city and speaking with local authorities. I've also performed preliminary calculations. Then, tell us plainly, another officer demands. Is this some new type of incendiary? A new explosive? Can we counter it? For a moment, Nishina looks at the row of uniforms, at the medals glinting on their chests. He thinks of the young conscripts he saw in Hiroshima, their uniforms burned into their skin. He thinks of how for years these men have asked him about the power locked in the nucleus, dreaming of a weapon that could crush American fleets and end the war in a single stroke. Now he must tell them that the dream has come true, but not for Japan. It is neither incendiary nor chemical, he says steadily. The pattern of destruction, the absence of a crater, the intensity of the thermal radiation. All of it indicates a single conclusion. He lets the words fall with the same weight they carried in the ruins. The weapon used on Hiroshima was an atomic bomb. The room goes very still. One of the younger officers shifts in his seat as if to protest, then thinks better of it. "Your certainty?" the presiding general asks. "Hi," Nishina replies. "The data match our own theoretical predictions. An airburst at several hundred meters, a yield on the order of tens of thousands of tons of TNT. I estimate a fission device using uranium-235. You told us such a device was beyond our industrial capacity," another general says sharply. "You told us it was beyond even America's reach." Nishina does not flinch. "I told you it would require an enormous industrial effort. I underestimated how much they were willing and able to commit." He pauses, then adds, "Our own program has not progressed beyond small laboratory experiments. We have no large-scale uranium separation facilities, no pilot plant for weaponization. We are at best years away." Silence again. In that silence, you can sense the shift. The moment when men who have clung to visions of secret weapons and miraculous reversals feel the ground move under their feet. "If you are correct," the presiding general says slowly, "then the United States possesses a weapon against which we have no defense." Nishina's answer is simple. Yes. Someone at the far end of the table mutters a curse. Another officer stares at the map of Japan on the wall at the red pins marking key cities, Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya, Kokura. Each one now a potential Hiroshima. The presiding general clears his throat. "We will need a written report for the cabinet and the imperial conference," he says. "Be precise, but careful in your wording." As Nishina bows and gathers his papers, he catches a flicker of something in the faces before him. Not just fear, but something harder to name. A kind of dawning comprehension that all the courage in the world cannot balance an equation of steel and uranium and factories they never built. The race for the atom had not been a sprint Japan narrowly lost at the finish. It had been a marathon they started late, ran on sand, and abandoned to chase other dreams. Only now, with Hiroshima's ashes still on his cuffs, does Nishina see how far ahead the Americans must have been for years. And somewhere across the Pacific in laboratories and plants, he can only imagine that lead is measured not in equations, but in bombs already assembled and waiting. That night, Tokyo glows faintly under a sickly summer moon. Air raid scars run through the capital like old wounds, open lots where neighborhoods once stood blackened beams poking from rubble, the jagged ribs of factories outlined against the sky. Near the very center of the city, however, the lights are still intact. Behind stone walls and manicured pines, the imperial palace lies in shadow, its moat reflecting a thin stripe of silver. On the far side of those walls, in a guarded room deep within a government building, Yoshio Nishina waits to be called. The corridor outside hums with muted voices. Officers and civilians move past with hurried steps, some in army uniforms gone shiny at the elbows, others in rumpled dark suits clinging to briefcases, stuffed with reports and maps. Everyone carries paper. No one carries good news. A chamberlain in formal dress appears at the doorway. "Dr. Nishina," he says softly, "the conference is ready for your testimony." You follow him down the hall with your eyes past guards who straighten as he passes past a row of tall windows that look out on the dark line of the palace moat. The air is thick with tobacco and the faint tang of sweat trapped in wool. Inside the conference room, the atmosphere feels heavier still. At the top of the long table sit the highest men of the realm, Prime Minister Suzuki with his white beard and weary eyes, Foreign Minister Togo in his Western suit and narrow shoulders, War Minister Anami, heavy and rigid in uniform. Nearby are the chiefs of the Army and Navy, General Staff, their rows of ribbons catching the weak light. At one end of the room, a sliding door opens to a smaller private chamber. Behind that door, within easy call, is the Emperor himself. His presence is never named aloud, but every man in the room feels it like another weight on the air. Nishina bows deeply. Outside, far away, a train whistle sounds across the city. Dr. Nishina Suzuki begins, voice polite but strained. You have examined Hiroshima and reported to the Army Ministry. We ask that you brief this council directly. Speak freely. We require clarity. Nishina sets his papers on the table, but does not look at them yet. He looks instead at the faces before him, men who have steered Japan through years of war, who have heard every rumor of miracle weapons and secret projects. Men who have kept hope alive by imagining that somewhere hidden in a laboratory or a shipyard, something waited to turn the tide. Your Excellencies. He says the weapon used on Hiroshima is of a type not previously seen in war. It is an atomic bomb based on the fission of uranium. There is a faint rustle as several men shift in their seats. Togo's eyes narrow behind his glasses. The Navy chief's fingers drum once against the table, then stop. You are certain? Suzuki asks. Yes. He does not give them only certainty. He gives them details because details are what make disbelief impossible. He describes the pattern of destruction, the burned shadows, the radius of total collapse. He describes the airburst, the absence of a crater, the intensity of the flash that blinded and burned at several kilometers. He sketches numbers on a sheet of paper, estimated yield approximate mass of fissile material, the necessary separation of uranium isotopes. As far as our calculations indicate, Nishina says this is the result of a rapid chain reaction in a supercritical mass of uranium-235. The energy release matches our theoretical predictions from earlier studies at Riken. You told the services, War Minister Anami says slowly, that such a weapon was not practical for Japan. That is still true, Nishina replies. Our program has been limited to small-scale experiments. We have no large separation plants. We lack sufficient uranium or electrical power and industrial capacity. We are far from a bomb. He lets that hang, then adds, the United States, however, has clearly overcome these obstacles. For such a weapon to exist, they must have built large factories devoted solely to the separation of uranium. That implies a major long-term project using vast resources. It did not begin recently. The implication settles like dust. The Americans were not racing on equal footing. They were running on a different track entirely, one Japan never had the strength to build. Foreign Minister Togo leans forward. Then this was not an improvised weapon built in desperation, he says. It is the product of an enormous program planned years in advance. Yes, Nishina answers. I believe they have been working toward this for most of the war, perhaps since before it began. A silence follows that is not quite shock, not quite resignation. It is something in between, like the moment when a man realizes the storm he thought was passing has, in fact, only just arrived. Suzuki's gaze drifts to the map of Japan on the wall. Red circles already mark Hiroshima, Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya, Yokohama, all bombed with conventional weapons. His fingers tighten on the arm of his chair. In your expert judgment, he asks quietly, can we prevent further use of such bombs by military means? Nishina thinks of flak bursts over cities, of searchlights stabbing at high-flying bombers. He thinks of a single B-29 over Hiroshima, almost unchallenged, dropping one device that did the work of hundreds. No Prime Minister, he says. In practical terms, there is no defense. We might shoot down some aircraft, but if they have more bombs, some will reach their targets. One bomb can destroy a city's heart. War Minister Anami's jaw clenches. But how many can they have? I do not know, Nishina admits. To produce the material for each bomb requires significant effort. I doubt they have many at this moment. But even a few are enough. He hesitates, then says the words that feel heaviest of all. And if they have built the plants, they can continue to make more. In time, they could have many. The room goes quiet again. Far away, a clock ticks. You can picture the thoughts moving behind their eyes. For years, they have counted strength in divisions and ships in pilots and artillery in factories and coal. Now, a new unit enters the calculation bombs that each carry the power of a fleet of bombers released from a single aircraft without warning. Togo clears his throat. The Americans have issued a statement, he says, referring to the leaflet and radio broadcast that spoke of a new bomb with destructive power beyond any seen before. They warn that continued resistance will bring similar attacks upon other cities. He looks around the table. They're not bluffing, it seems. No one contradicts him. Behind the sliding door in the smaller chamber, there is a faint sound of movement. A voice murmurs too soft for Nishina to hear. A chamberlain appears at the door, inclines his head, and withdraws. Whatever is said inside that inner room will not be recorded in minutes or transcripts, but it will steer the fate of millions. Suzuki finally speaks. Dr. Nishina, one last question. Could we in any reasonable time produce such a weapon ourselves? The scientist from Riken thinks of the lab benches back in Waco, of improvised apparatus, of requisition forms delayed for months by shortages and bureaucrats. He thinks of the uranium samples sent from Korea, carefully weighed and stored in a locked cabinet because obtaining more would be so difficult. He thinks of German reports smuggled via submarine too late and too fragmentary to change anything. No prime minister, he says. Not in time to effect this war. Even if we began now with full effort, we would be years behind. There it is. The moment the leaders of Japan hear in plain scientific language that the race they dreamed of winning was decided long ago, while their own project never left the starting line. As Nishina gathers his notes and bows himself out, the men at the table are left staring at a future in which courage, sacrifice, and discipline collide with a simple, brutal fact: the enemy has opened a door in nature that Japan only managed to knock upon. Outside the palace, Moat lies still reflecting a pale slice of sky. Somewhere to the west beyond the horizon, another American bomber crew is already training for a mission whose target has not yet been chosen. 2 days later, the cicadas scream in the trees around the Riken campus at Waco just outside Tokyo, as if nothing in the world has changed. Inside the main physics building, the air is thick with chalk dust and sweat. The blackout curtains are drawn tight, so the only light comes from bare bulbs dangling over laboratory benches littered with coils of wire glass tubes and notebooks whose pages are more theory than result. This is where Japan's atomic hopes have lived for the last years of the war. Not in vast secret cities like the Americans have built, but in a handful of rooms like this, crowded with equipment scavenged from peacetime research, starved of material and power. Yoshio Nishina stands at the front of a narrow lecture room, jacket off shirt stuck to his back. Before him sit his closest collaborators, Bunsaku Arakatsu, up from Kyoto Youngsagane, a half-dozen assistants and graduate students whose eyes are wide, not with youthful ambition now, but with something closer to dread. On the blackboard behind him, the remains of an earlier lecture still cling in white arcs and symbols. Cross-sections for uranium-neutron diffusion equations, half-erased graphs of critical mass versus density. Let us be honest with one another, Nishina says quietly. You have all heard what happened at Hiroshima. You know why I was sent there, murmurs. Nods. One of the younger researchers cannot sit still. His finger taps the edge of his notebook in a nervous staccato. We calculated this weapon years ago, Nishina continues. Not in detail, but in principle. We told the army what would be required: uranium ore separation plants, cyclotrons, vast power supplies. We were given some support, a little uranium from Korea, access to this institute, some funding. He gestures around them. At the lab, at the narrow corridors, at the single aging cyclotron whose massive magnet, silent now, squats like a sleeping animal in the next hall. This is what our nuclear program has been, he says. We called it research. The Americans, I think, called theirs production. He chalks a rough diagram, one column marked Japan, another marked United States. Under Japan, he lists one medium cyclotron, small experimental uranium samples, limited heavy water, no large reactors, pilot calculations only. Under United States, he writes what he has inferred from Hiroshima. Multiple large plants for isotope separation, at least one operating reactor for plutonium, dedicated industrial power supply, completed bomb design and delivery system. Each word is like a stone dropping into water. We thought, Sagan says hesitantly, that we were only a few years behind. That if the war continued, we might complete. Nishina shakes his head. We misjudged Sagani-kun, not in physics, in scale. He draws a square on the board to represent a single lab building. Then beside it he draws an enormous rectangle that dwarfs it, and another and another. Imagine, he says, facilities as large as an entire town devoted only to separating uranium. Entire power stations feeding them, thousands of workers, engineers, mathematicians, all under one program, shielded by secrecy and protected from bombs. You speak as if you have seen it, someone says softly. In a way, I have. Nishina answers. I walked through what their first success did to Hiroshima. Silence. You can almost feel the word race crumble in that room. For years they had thought of it that way. A race in which Japanese genius might offset American industry, where a clever design or a daring shortcut could leap over shortages. They built their program like a sprint on a mountain path, steep, narrow, improvised. The Americans, it turns out, were laying down a highway. We never had the ore, Arakatsu says suddenly, voice edged with bitterness. When we asked for more uranium, the army said shipping was too dangerous. When we asked for more power, they said the grid was needed for aircraft plants. We were told to make do, to be inventive. Nishina nods. He remembers those meetings too well, officers, insisting that Japanese spirit and ingenuity would compensate for lack of resources, as if patriotism could enrich uranium. And we tried, Nishina says. We built what we could. We measured cross-sections. We calculated critical masses. We even began designs for a separation plant on a modest scale. But it was never enough. He wipes the board clean with quick, angry strokes, leaving only a single line. Years behind, with no path to catch up. Sensei, a young assistant, asks if we had been given everything, all the ore, all the power. Could we have done what they did? That is the question they all carry, the one that gnaws at pride as well as conscience. In time, Nishina says slowly, yes, the physics is not beyond us. We understand the same equations. But would the state have committed such resources, closed entire regions to build factories, pulled engineers from other projects? I do not think so. The admission stings. Japan's leaders had dreamed of miracle weapons, but they had never truly believed in the scale of sacrifice such a project demanded. He turns back to them. I want you to understand this clearly, he says. We have not merely lost a race. We were never truly in it. Not as a nation. Only as a handful of laboratories working at the edge of starvation. A heavy quiet settles. Somewhere in the building, glass rattles as a distant truck passes its engine, laboring under a too heavy load. The Army and Navy will ask us now, Nishina goes on, how we can strike back, whether we can retaliate in kind. You must be ready to tell them the truth. We cannot. Not in any time that matters to this war. He sees fear in some faces, relief in others. One assistant looks almost sick with the realization. Another looks as if a weight has been removed, as if the pressure of an impossible expectation has finally cracked and fallen away. What will happen now, Sagane asks. Nishina thinks of the second city that must already be in someone's sights. He thinks of Nagasaki's churches, Kokura's arsenals, the dockyards at Sasebo. He has seen the way the generals looked at the map, their fingers hovering over names like a doctor aware of spreading gangrene. I believe he says quietly that the Americans will use the bomb again unless our leaders choose to surrender. And I believe our emperor will be asked to decide very soon. The word surrender hangs like a taboo in the air. For years, the official line has been decisive, battle final stand, glorious sacrifice. But the physicists in this room are trained to follow reality, not slogans. Hiroshima has shown them a reality that does not care about honor. Nishina closes his notebook. I will be asked to prepare another report, he says. One for history, perhaps. An account of what was done and what was not. Some of you will help me. Others will be called to work on measuring the effects, the radiation, the medical consequences. We must understand this weapon even if we never build it. He pauses, then adds, especially if we never build it. For a moment, you see him not just as a scientist of the wartime empire, but as a man standing with one foot in a new age he did not choose. An age in which the power they chased in equations has been unleashed by someone else, and his duty is no longer to make it for his country, but to understand it for humanity. Outside, the cicadas scream on in the summer heat, indifferent to human calculations. Inside, among chalk and notebooks and equipment held together with tape and hope, Japan's top nuclear scientists finally see their project for what it has been, not a near miss, but a distant echo of a race decided in factories they never imagined. The afternoon of August 9th is hot enough that the air in Tokyo feels like wet cloth. In the Riken courtyard, young assistants stand near a small radio set up on a stool, its wire antenna stretched like a spider thread toward the second floor. They are not supposed to be listening during work hours. But since Hiroshima rules have become more suggestion than law, the broadcast crackles through static. A formal voice speaks from somewhere far away, reporting troop movements, air raid warnings, the usual litany of shrinking fronts and brave resistance. Then the tone changes. Shortly before noon today, the announcer says the city of Nagasaki was subjected to a single unprecedentedly powerful attack by enemy aircraft. Destruction is reported to be severe. One of the assistants swears under his breath. Another goes very still. In a nearby office, Nishina freezes with his hand on a stack of papers. He cannot hear the words clearly, but he hears Nagasaki, powerful attack, and single aircraft. He steps into the hall, his shoes loud on the floorboards, and follows the faint noise to the courtyard door. When he appears in the doorway, the young men scatter a little, suddenly aware they have been caught. The radio continues to mutter. Say that again, one assistant whispers to another. Single plane. They said a single plane. Nishina does not scold them. He moves closer, eyes on the radio, listening. The announcer repeats the essentials, voice strained. One aircraft. One bomb. A city badly damaged. There is a moment standing in that patch of dusty sunlight with the cicadas screaming in the trees when he feels the last lingering doubt die. Hiroshima might have been some experimental device, a one-time triumph, a miracle that the Americans could not repeat quickly. Nagasaki tells him otherwise. He lowers his gaze, studying the faces around him. They look back, searching his expression for hope that is not there. Sensei One breathes. Do you think? Yes, he says quietly. It is the same type of weapon, perhaps improved. A bird flutters from one pine to another, startled by nothing more than a raised human voice. Somewhere, a truck grinds past on the road, gears protesting as it hauls another load of something to somewhere that no longer matters. Inside the main lab, a telephone bursts into shrill life. A clerk hurries past them to answer, bowing slightly as he squeezes through. The call is from the Army Ministry. Another from the Cabinet Office follows. Everyone wants the same thing, confirmation. Within an hour, Nishina finds himself once more in a car heading into Tokyo proper, the Riken buildings receding behind him. His briefcase is lighter this time. There are no new calculations to show, no photographs from ground zero. The numbers he has already given them are enough. Nagasaki is simply the proof that the United States is not merely in possession of a single terrifying prototype, but of a functioning arsenal, however small. At the Army Ministry, the corridors feel different. The officers who hurry past seem less sure of themselves, their voices low, their eyes tight. The usual stiffness is still there, but it looks fragile now, like lacquer over cracked wood. In a smaller conference room than before, War Minister Anami and a handful of staff officers await him. Cigarette smoke coils in the still air. An ashtray overflows. A map of Kyushu is spread across the table, Nagasaki circled in red pencil that is still damp. Dr. Nishina Anami says, his voice rougher than last time you have heard the reports. Yes. Nagasaki. They say one plane again, one bomb. Nishina nods once. Then your conclusions regarding American capacity must be revised, an intelligence officer says. His tone is sharp, but his fingers tremble slightly where they rest on the table. You estimated perhaps 1 or 2 bombs based on uranium production. I said at least one more was likely, Nishina replies calmly. We now know they had it ready. There may be others. He walks to the map, studies the distance between Hiroshima and Nagasaki, imagines 2 mission profiles, 2 flight crews, 2 bombs loaded under tight guard in an island chain far out in the Pacific. They are using them rapidly, he says. That suggests they are confident in having some reserve. It may also mean they wish to force a political decision before demonstrating their full stockpile. In either case, it shows that Hiroshima was not an isolated effort. Anami stares at the map, then at the scientist. There is sweat at his temples, darkening his hair. If we continue fighting, one colonel says, could they bomb Tokyo next? Yes, Nishina says, if they choose. But they may not need to. The threat alone may suffice, combined with what has already happened. The colonel swallows. You can see him imagining it, the capital flattened in one flash, the palace moat boiling, the ministries and barracks erased. Whatever visions of final battles in the homeland he once cherished do not include cities simply vanishing into smoke. A staff officer clears his throat. The Navy believes, he says cautiously, that the Americans cannot have produced many bombs yet. Perhaps only these 2. Perhaps Nishina allows. Or perhaps not. But tell me, Colonel, how many cities can Japan afford to lose to find out? The question hangs in the room heavier than any argument. No one answers. Later that evening, in a different building, that question echoes in a far more important chamber. The Supreme War Council meets in extraordinary session, men drawn tight as bowstrings around the table. Reports from Nagasaki arrive in fragments. Blinding flash, a blast, a towering column of smoke. Telecommunication lines are disrupted, details slow, but the pattern is already clear to anyone willing to see it. When Nishina is summoned briefly to repeat in summary what he has already told them, he finds their eyes different than before. The incredulity has gone. Only calculation remains, and behind it, something like fear. In light of a second use, Suzuki asks, does your assessment of American production change? It confirms it, Nishina answers. They have a program, not an experiment. We have nothing comparable. We have no countermeasure, except to prevent them from using more by political means. He does not say the word surrender. He does not need to. It sits unspoken on the table between them, as real as any document. When they release him, he steps out into a corridor that smells of tatami ink and exhaustion. A chamberlain passes, carrying a sheaf of papers into the room where the emperor will soon be informed of Nagasaki. For a moment, Nishina stands alone by a window. Outside, Tokyo lies in patchwork slabs of darkness, where raids have cleared whole districts, islands of light, where power still flows. The city looks fragile, as if a single breath from the sky could blow it away. He presses his palm lightly to the glass, remembering Hiroshima's heat, the fused tiles, the shadows burned into stone. Remembering the way his own equations lined up with those ruins. There is no race now, only consequences. Back at Riken, his colleagues listen to late-night rumors and wait. Some cling to talk that the Americans have spent their terrible new weapon and have no more. Others mutter that the Soviets have entered the war in Manchuria and that this not any bomb will decide things. But among the scientists, among the men who have looked inside the atom, there is a quieter understanding. Nagasaki is not just another tragedy in a long war. It is the closing of a door that they once hoped to open first. In laboratories that smell of oil and chalk, Japan's nuclear physicists begin to realize that their work has slipped. Its leash crossed the ocean and come back to them in the form of 2 ruined cities. And somewhere above the dark Pacific, more B-29s wait on runways, their bomb bays empty for the moment, their crews briefed on missions that may never have to fly. if one decision at the very top finally acknowledges what the scientists already know. Morning of August 15th, 1945, Tokyo. The heat has settled over the city like a lid. The sky is a pale, washed-out blue, the kind that makes everything beneath it look tired. In the Riken compound, the cicadas drone as if they mean to drown out the human world entirely. Inside a stuffy lecture room, the chairs have been pushed back to the walls. A single wooden table holds a radio set, its cloth speaker grill faded, its knobs polished by years of cautious fingers. Wires snake to an outlet that should probably be powering more important equipment. No one cares. Every corridor is empty. Everyone is here. Physicists in rumpled shirts, assistants with ink-stained hands, clerks, a janitor still holding his broom. Sagane stands near the back shoulder against the wall, arms folded tight. At the front, close to the radio, sits Yoshio Nishina. He has a notebook on his knee but no pencil in his hand. For once, there is nothing to calculate. At noon, the room holds its breath. The radio crackles. A formal voice announces that His Majesty the Emperor will now address the nation. No one in the room has ever heard him speak directly before. They bow instinctively, even though he is only a presence inside the wooden box. The cicadas scream on outside. Then another voice comes through, higher than many expect. Measured, remote. Words in an old court style roll out unfamiliar even to educated ears. But the key phrases cut through the archaic language and the static. The war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. The enemy has begun to employ a new and most cruel bomb, the power of which is truly incalculable. Continuing the war would mean not only the downfall of our nation, but the destruction of all human civilization. In the back of the room, someone makes a choking sound. It might be a sob. Nishina stares at the radio, at the cloth that hides its speaker. With those words, the Emperor has reached into the heart of their work, into their private notebooks and lectures and calculations. He has taken the thing they studied as possibility and named it as the reason Japan must stop fighting. A new and most cruel bomb, the power of which is truly incalculable. Except Nishina thinks they did calculate it. They calculated it in this very building with chalk and slide rules, long before an American bomber ever appeared over Hiroshima. They ran the numbers on fission energy, on chain reactions, on critical masses. They saw in theory what it would mean if someone turned those numbers into metal and wiring and high explosive and dropped the result from the sky. They did the math. The Americans built the bomb. The Emperor speaks of enduring the unendurable and suffering the insufferable. He does not use the word surrender, but every man in the room hears it anyway. The choice that the Supreme War Council had circled for days has finally been made. As the voice fades and the formal closing words are spoken, no one moves. The radio hums softly in the sudden absence of speech. Outside, somewhere far off, a dog barks, once confused by the silence that has filled the human spaces. Then the room exhales. One assistant sinks onto a chair, hands over his face. Another stares at the floor as if something might be written there to explain how they ended up in this moment. Sagane looks at his teacher. "Sensei," he says quietly. "It was the bomb that decided it, was it not?" Nishina is silent for a long moment. The Soviets are in Manchuria. The Navy is broken. The air defenses are thin threads. There were many hands tugging the rope toward this day. But the Emperor did not mention the fall of Saipan, or the loss of the fleet, or the B-29 raids alone. He mentioned one thing by name. "Yes," Nishina says at last. "The bomb, and the knowledge that there would be more." He stands slowly, joints protesting after sitting so long. The room watches him. For years, he has been the man the army turned to when it wanted to hear that Japan might catch up in the hidden war of laboratories. Today, his presence means something else. "We must remember this," he says, "not just what was done to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but what we did not do. What we could not do." He looks around at them, at the men who have shared cramped labs and scant materials with him through the war. "From the beginning, our program was small. The state never gave it the resources it needed. We were asked to perform miracles with scraps. The Americans built cities for their project. We shared power with nearby factories and prayed the lights would stay on. His voice does not hold bitterness now, only a tired clarity. We told ourselves we were only a few steps behind, that if the war lasted, we would reach the same summit. Today, we know the truth. We were not climbing the same mountain. He closes the notebook on his knee, even though the pages inside are blank. In time, he says, foreign scientists and officers will come here. They will ask many questions. They will want to know how far we progressed what we understood. You will answer them honestly. You will show them our incomplete experiments, our cyclotron, our half-finished plans. Let them see that we tried, but also that we were far from their Manhattan. The name feels strange in his mouth, an English word for an American island and an American project that has cast its shadow across the world. They will see, he continues, that Japan did not lose a close race. We barely made it out of the starting blocks, and perhaps that will matter someday when nations argue about who should hold such weapons. Later that year, in the gray chill of early autumn, American officers in pressed uniforms will indeed walk the halls of Riken notebooks and cameras in hand. They will examine the cyclotron run fingers along the cold magnet steel pier at apparatus held together with string and hope. They will flip through Japanese papers filled with familiar equations, and some will look almost relieved. No hidden arsenal here, no secret reactor, only theory and fragments. In one of those tours, an American physicist, hair already going thin, will stand with Nishina by window and look out at the rebuilt scaffolding and the trees beyond. You understood the physics, the American will say quietly. You just never had the plants. Yes, Nishina will reply. We had the path on paper. You had it on the ground. He will not say that he is grateful they failed. He will not say that he is haunted by the thought of a Japanese bomb falling on an American city. He carries both truths at once, like two incompatible measurements that somehow must coexist. Back in August, on the day of the broadcast, such reflections still lie in the future. For now, there is only the immediate raw awareness settling over the scientists at Riken. Awareness that the thing they once hoped might be their country's salvation has instead been its final argument for surrender. The war is over. The nuclear race for them ended 9 days earlier in the fire over Hiroshima. On that day, walking through the flattened city and reading the story written in fused tiles, twisted steel and burned shadows, Japan's top physicists saw not just the weapon that killed tens of thousands, but the shape of a program far beyond anything their nation had built. They knew, in that moment, that the finish line had been crossed without them, that the atom had been mastered by someone else, for purposes they could no longer influence. Now, as the Emperor's voice fades into static and the cicadas scream on under the heavy summer sky, that realization hardens into history. The equations on their blackboards have become the architecture of a new age. And Japan, the country that once dreamed of leading that age, must now step into it as a nation that learned too late what it means to lose a race it barely knew it was running.